In Germany, after the First World War, there was the Spartacist Revolution, a communist uprising that ended quite soon. Let's suppose that the revolt is not put down. There is a revolution, and in 1923 the communists won, as happened in Russia. Germany is now a Soviet republic. The leader is Liebknecht. Soviet Russia and Germany are allies. Communism then spread to other countries, causing tension throughout the world. After the German invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1930, France and the United Kingdom declared war on the communist bloc. A Second World War had begun. Capitalism against communism. The two sides. The Soviet Union, Trotsky as its leader. Germany, with Liebknecht as its leader. Italy, Togliatti seized the power in 1923. Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia. China, now communist after the elimination of Chiang Kai-shek. On the other side, the British Empire. France, headed by Pétain. Japan. The USA are neutral for the moment. At the start of the war, the French stay behind the Maginot Line. Their plan is to remain there for the next 2 or 3 years, while weakening Germany and Italy with the naval blockade and complete the rearmament. France neither rates the Red military power very highly. During the First World War, they defeated Germany. Russia had collapsed and Italy is too poor. But it is a different situation now than in 1914. During World War I, the French were barely able to hold the front against the Germans alone. Russia and Italy are now German allies. The Germans have no threats in the east, a gigantic advantage. The Germans do not care about the Treaty of Versailles, so they still have all the artillery evacuated from France and Belgium in 1918 at the end of the war. In this situation, Germany mobilizes earlier, not in 1943 as Nazi Germany did, bringing the strength of their armed forces above 10 million. Add 2 million men that the Italians have in the southern front. The Soviets have more than 20 million men and an infinity of cannons and mortars. China has even more men than the Soviets has, and add Hungary, Slovakia and Bulgaria. French and the British forces cannot even remotely match those numbers. In May 1930, after the preliminary skirmishes, the Germans have invaded Belgium and the Netherlands, as they usually do. This war will have less trenches. There will be huge artillery bombardments followed by mass attacks from infantry and light tanks. Without the restriction of Versailles, the Germans developed their own tanks. There's the predecessor of the Panzer I. After the attack in Belgium, the Maginot Line would have been broken somewhere. Now the German Rote Armee will rush towards Paris. After the crossing of the Marne, the French army collapses in mutinies. This operation will be very costly for the Germans, maybe even more than 200,000 men. But it would have ended with the Germans marching in Paris and in Dunkirk for the British. In June 1930, France would surrender. A People's Republic under Maurice Thorez is proclaimed in France. Belgium and the Netherlands follow the same path. Luxembourg becomes one of the Soviet republics of Germany. A French government in exile led by Pétain is installed in London. After the fall of France, the Royal Navy tightens the blockade. Germany, Italy and the Soviets have almost no navy. The Germans, during the war, will develop a wide fleet of submarines, but the Allied, with the British, Japanese and French fleets, have the absolute control over the seas. The American Navy starts to help the Allied to blockade the seas. But you can blockade a nation, not a continent. The naval blockade is ineffective. The victory in the West results in a wave of euphoria among the German population and a rising support for the communist government the whole of Europe. At this point, with the French out of the game and the British out of the continent, the Red Armies are unstoppable. In June 1930, Romania is invaded. A revolutionary committee led by Gheorghe Cristescu seizes the power. Italy invades Albania in June 1930. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia is invaded in October 1930. with the Yugoslav communist guerrillas helping the Red Armies. Greece is invaded in November. The Soviets attack Finland in May of 1930. In September of 1930, the Germans invade Denmark to prevent a British landing there. Then the invasion of Norway starts. Merchant ships are used to land troops in the south of Norway. The German and Soviet combined forces invade Sweden. Sweden's military is small compared to the two Red Armies. The Soviets invade Persia in March 1931. The conquest is rapid. However, due to bad roads and bad logistics, they fail the main target of the operation, India and the Middle East. The few brigades the British have in the area are enough to stop the Soviets. Switzerland is under a total land blockade for everything, and forced to accept the supervision of a Soviet committee. Similar pressures are made on Turkey, forced to accept a German-Soviet military presence in the Dardanelles. Spain and Portugal do not go to war despite the good relations with the communist bloc. They are too weak after the Civil War and will remain neutral. At the end of 1931, Europe is fully red. In the Far East, the Japanese invade Shanghai, Fujian, and Tianjin. Indian, Canadian, New Zealand, and Australian troops fight in this front. The Japanese have some more troops and more resources and petrol supplied by the British colonies in USA. But in this timeline, the Chinese army is more efficient. The Chinese Civil War ended in 1928. All warlords are eliminated, gaining full control of their armies. Then the Japanese Empire has not conquered Manchuria, the most industrialized area in China. Without Manchukuo and having to face the German Soviet-trained Chinese troops and equipments, though Japanese are stopped at Nanjing and only take a small portion of Fujian. There is the Soviet intervention in China. The Japanese are defeated at Lake Khasan near Vladivostok. Chinese and Soviet forces advance towards Korea. The Italians lose their colonies soon, but nobody cares. Eritrea, Somalia, and Libya are useless. There is a small-scale air battle of Britain, where Germans and British exchange air raids. The bombing campaign is largely ineffective. The aircrafts in 1930 are mainly biplanes. Their importance is therefore limited. The American leaders see the communists as the bad guys. Not just some random bad guys, but the bad guys from the depths of hell. To them, communism is something alien that must be eradicated. The USA continued to supply the British Empire with weapons and military equipment. American banks give huge loans to Britain. There are sinkings of American ships, as well as attacks on German submarines. Newspapers talk every day about the violence perpetrated by the communists in the occupied countries and the possibility of an imminent Soviet invasion of Alaska. Communists are put into a concentration camp at Camp Upton in New York, or deported to a penal camp along the Yukon River. Mass meetings are prohibited. General strikes become a crime. Even the display of the red flag is prohibited. Since January of 1931, there are several anarchist bombings in the USA. On May 1st in 1931, there are multiple large demonstrations and violence sparks in normally peaceful parades in several cities. In the night, there is an arson attack on the United States Congress. The police arrests Tomo Kacic, a Croatian communist in the USA since 1926, found near the building. In the next days, there are mass arrests of communists, especially of foreigners. Then, on the 5th of May, the American President Herbert Hoover announces the declaration of war on the Red Powers. The USA enters the war. The infusion of fresh US troops strengthened the British strategic position and boost their morale. In the Far East, the arrival of American troops at the end of 1931 helps the Japanese to stop the Soviets at Busan in Korea. During 1932, the USA drafted 5 million men into military service and about 1 million US soldiers had arrived in Britain. By the end of 1932, the situation in Europe has stalled. The Reds have no navy to invade Britain, but the Allied have no way of facing up with the gigantic amount of troops the Reds have in Europe. A sort of phony war begins. The fighting on the field in Europe is over, but the situation is not quite done yet. Europe is devastated. 2 world wars in 15 years brought famine and revolts. In Britain, food and other essential items are scarce. Italy is on the verge of a civil war. The European countries occupied by the communist forces must be controlled, since the communist governments which were installed are often not well accepted by the population. Germany in the last few years has become more autocratic and oppressive. Liebknecht has become a sort of a non-anti-Semitist Hitler, silencing the people with anti-communist tendencies. In the USA, and especially in Britain, the leaders continue to fear a communist uprising of their own. Their economies never recovered from the Great Depression, and people live in bad economic situations might support communism. The strikes and anti-war speeches suffer violent attacks. The desire of independence in India is rising, with the risk of a revolt. USA in the 30s is not the superpower capable to win the war on its own. After the fall of France, the UK has no strong allies anymore, and the losses from U-boats are rising. The Allied know it will be very hard and costly to defeat the communists. Germany has a huge technological and industrial advantage. The Soviets and the Chinese have natural resources and manpower, and combine the industry of the entire continental Western Europe. A kind of peace is convenable to both sides. From 1934, there is a sort of undeclared armistice on the positions where the front is located. The Allied naval blockade continues without too much conviction. The submarine war lowers the intensity, the few land fighting slowly disappear, and in 1935, the war has just stopped, without even a peace treaty. A Cold War soon starts. In Europe, the countries occupied during the war are independent, but have Volkswehr constantly stationed in their territory, like the US Army in post-World War II Japan. There are uprisings and turmoil in France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Scandinavia, Germany itself, and the Volkswehr intervenes in the conflicts of those countries and put them down one by one. The uprisings of Poland after the war are crushed by Trotsky's regime. The war spending in America lifted the American industry out of the Great Depression. Hoover wins the re-election in 1932, with the media controlled by anti-communist FBI censors supporting Hoover. Europe being all communist, there are no anti-fascist policies in the US politics. Since the blacks and the poor support communists, and the KKK being a far-right anti-Semitic, anti-communist and racist political party, it becomes a tool of US governments to do a dirty job. There will be a fight in the streets between the KKK and leftist organizations, assassination of leaders and of each other. The second wave of KKK, Second Clan, continues to grow after the war. There will be more than 4 million members in the USA and participates in the local US state elections, sometimes even winning and having governors in Middle and Western American states. The US society will become more authoritarian and racist in general. The Japanese continue their war with China, as well as continuing to enforce the naval blockade over China and Vladivostok. The war has very little success. The Japanese Empire leaves Shanghai and Fujian, maintaining occupations in those regions. Facing massive Chinese counterattacks every day would have worn out the Japanese soldiers without any gains. The long occupation of Tianjin is also impossible. Hong Kong is under siege by the Chinese since the UK allied with the Japanese during World War II. In Japan, there is discontent over the government. A military junta government with fascist characteristics rise into power. Korea is under Soviet influence, only with Busan in American hands as a sort of Guantanamo. After 1935, the German leader Liebknecht is forced to be more pragmatic in order to keep Marxism in power. There are factions inside the KPD with more liberal approaches on economic theories than the Soviet ones, led by people like Karl Korsch. There are economic reforms similar to the new economic policies of Lenin. There will be currencies, people are allowed to keep and trade part of their products, paying taxes. Since Germany has advanced technology and is highly industrialized, you can imagine an economic model like China has today, with the large industrial enterprises controlled by the KPD. Bauhaus was oppressed by the Nazis historically. It will not happen in this timeline. We will see the Palace of the Soviets being built in Moscow, and Bauhaus being a popular art style in Russia and Soviet regions, mostly in architecture. Albert Speer, at the start of his life, was apolitical. He could have worked for the KPD in communist Germany, becoming the architect of the people, and building some structures like the Volkshalle and the Münchner Hauptbahnhof. Germany starts to build battleships and aircraft carriers in the protected seas of the Baltic, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea, where the capitalist bombers cannot reach them. There are the first tests of rockets and the first Wunderwaffe weapon. The German scientists, with collaboration of the Soviets and the Italian Enrico Fermi, start to theorize a new powerful bomb. Liebknecht maintains good relationships with the Soviets, despite some minor quarrels as the influence on the Balkans and other little things. The UK and the USA continue to blockade them, and Germans need the Russian resources. In Russia, Trotsky and his generals had successfully won the war against Finland and Americans in the Far East. There were not devastating wars like Operation Barbarossa on their soil. Moreover, the USSR occupies Poland, Polish Socialist Republic. His power on it is firm. During the 1930s, the Soviet Union rapidly industrializes with the cooperation of Germany. In 1937, they have the first T-34 in mass production. Their oil and steel production, with mining instruments supported by Communist Germany, rise faster and rival the production rate of the USA in the late 1930s, enough to sustain the need of itself and the economic recovery of Communist Europe. It's time for purges. Stalin and other opponents are sent to the gulags. The war left the UK in a great crisis. The failed intervention of Western Europe, Greece, China and their trade breaking off between the UK and the whole of Eurasia, now communist. India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa gain independence before 1936. There is political turmoil. Several elections, several prime ministers, MacDonald, Baldwin, Attlee. In 1936, there is another Parliament general election, and the new prime minister is Winston Churchill. He's a hardline anti-communist and warmonger. There will be wars in the colonies in Africa, more aggressive actions against the Red Powers, and a rearmament program. This is the situation at the end of the 30s. What will happen next? There is the chance that the communist bloc could have an atomic bomb and rocket technology a decade before the USA, and with all that follows. Or the USA could turn fascist in the 1940s. With all that follows.